Thank you for choosing to listen to On Air with Chai and supporting our cause. Being a nonprofit organization, we rely on the support from our community to help keep our programs running and allow us to continually service our families while offering incredible experiences, such as family vacations after treatments, trips to Edmonton Mall, home-cooked meals, big sibling programs, day camp and sleepover camp, and many, many more. If you enjoy our stories and you're thinking of making a charitable donation, think of Lifeline Canada and the children you would be supporting. You can visit us at lifelinecanada.org. Welcome to On Air with Chai, a podcast that inspires, brings hope, shows resilience, and strength. On today's episode of On Air with Chai, we brought on special guest host Craig Freed, also goes by Choni. Choni was the first hire of Lifeline Canada back in 2008 as the very first fundraiser. Morty and Choni worked tirelessly together, making sure everyone knew what Lifeline Canada is and does. From their very first gala together to meeting with billionaire advertising and media owners, together they brought Lifeline Canada to where it is today. Enjoy. Welcome everybody to another great episode of On Air with Chai. Today we have a very special guest host with us, Craig Freed. He is CEO, owner of Freed Capital Mortgage, where his mission is to serve and help individuals and families build wealth and obtain financial freedom through real estate. You can find him at financial-freedom.ca, where he has educational content and blogs. And he works with investors and first-time home buyers. And he also goes by Choni Freed, for those who know him. As well, you all know my voice, although I have lost it a little bit. I'm Bryan Strasberg, one of your co-hosts of On Air with Chai. And today, our very, very esteemed special guest of honor, Rabbi Mordechai Rothman, Executive Director of Lifeline Canada. Welcome to your own show.
I would say the journey of our doing these podcasts together, I think, opened your eyes to some of the incredible things that we've been able to accomplish here at Lifeline as a team. And I think it was very humbling for you to ask me, hey, we'll ask you to share your story a little bit. And I'm very happy that you did, because I think that there's a story that needs to be told and should be shared with the world. So thank you.
You're very welcome. No, I completely agree with it. I mean, after we spoke with Moish Turk and seeing all the history there and everything, I was interested and wanted to dive more into that history of Lifeline with you and Lifeline Canada and how everything started and how you got to where you are today. So, I mean, we brought Craig in today. Choni is, he was kind of there from the very beginning, in essence. I mean, you started in 2006, came in 2008.
Yeah.
Obviously, the relationship kicked off. So how did you guys meet?
Well, we met in the third grade, actually.
Wow. Okay.
We went to school together, Ep1, which is a local Jewish day school here in Toronto. Although I was in the other class.
Yes.
But we lived in the same neighborhood and we shared a lot of common friends. And I'd say we met each other back then, but sort of lost touch during our high school years. Yeah. I think you went to Hamilton and I went to Nair Yisrael, and Hamilton, I don't know the formal name.
Yeshiva of Hamilton.
Yeshiva of Hamilton. And we kind of lost touch, but then I remember, I think we bumped into each other and you asked you what you were doing. You said, I'm in fundraising. And as a good fundraiser, he actually was pretty precocious and reaching out to me a couple times, hey, I heard there might be a job opening. We'd be interested. And at the time, it was really, I think it was just myself in the office.
Yeah, it was you, and I think you had a part-time secretary.
Yes, Hamadan Kona.
Yeah.
Yes, whose name was in our database for a very long time. I think I wasn't necessarily ready, or Lifeline wasn't ready to really bring on somebody else, but, and important. And I think that, again, in keeping with our theme of Lifeline podcast of being useful to, every person who's, running a business or things of that nature, I think, the first hire had to be a fundraiser. And that's kind of counterintuitive in nonprofit, because charities are supposed to be giving back. That's the goal. The input might be money, but the output is support and help to the community and whatever the mandate of that particular charity might be. And it was Rabbi Black from NCSY actually who pointed out to me, he said, if you hire a social worker as your first hire, you'll do great things. You'll help a lot of people, but it's one social worker. If you hire a fundraiser, you'll hire 5 social workers and you'll do incredible things. And from that, I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So our first hire was obviously somebody involved in development and fundraising. And in many respects, as much as Choni was hired, it was very much a partnership at that time. Like when you're in the trenches together, building something meaningful, powerful, impactful, it's just it's both of you right there and just building something amazing and really feeding off of each other's energy and where people are good and where they're not good and where I might have a strength, Choni or Craig might have had a weakness, and where Choni might have had a strength, I had a weakness, and like we really worked well together in that sense.
And I think it's interesting because neither one of us came from that background of development, right? Like I grew up in the personal finance space with my family's business, and then I was trained as a paramedic, had an undergrad in like communications and organizational behavior, and like I fell into development at Bar Ilan, and then heard about this incredible organization that's helping children, so the pediatric space, with social services, which is connected to healthcare, and I was like, oh wow, this is like the trifecta for me in terms of business and healthcare and all of that, and I was like, hey, I should try this. And I think it was remarkable for the two of us to think, like, if we think back to like those days on Staticona, or what we were able to do and how we did it and feeding off each other. I think the fact, like what you just said, that we both had different strengths and weaknesses made a huge, huge difference. And the fact we were literally right next door to each other, right?
Yeah.
When you think back to that office, really made a huge difference. Because it wasn't like I had to call you or find you, literally pop my head in and vice versa, to be able to like, hey, this is going on. What should we do about it?
Yeah.
Right?
It was interesting times, and I guess just to give a little bit of the origin story of before we got to the point of being able to hire Choni and bring him on. I was in an office actually with his name is Phil Bornoff, and he's still there. I think he's a ticket fighter on the corner here at Wilson and Bathurst. And at the time, one of our board members who had hired me had an extra office there, and he said, you should just take this office space and you'll work there and he'll work there. And, I actually became friendly with him, and we're still friendly to this day. I message him every so often. He messages me. And it was literally me sitting in an office. I had hired a friend of mine's wife to help me with the tax receipts. And I would go down to the hospital myself and visit the families. I put on the recruitment to get the volunteers, really a jack of all trades. And I think, when you're starting anything, I think, as a manager now, one of the things that I hate hearing is that's not my job. And they might be right. It might not be their job. And maybe I shouldn't be asking for somebody to do that. But I just come from this place of like, it wasn't my job, but this is what had to be done. So like, you're going to step up and do it. And I think, coming back to you, Choni, like, I think so many times there were things that were just outside of the purview of like development when you're starting out at that point. And you just got to just do it. And it's not a discussion. Like, well, we're not hiring somebody to like clean the office. So you got to clean your office. Like, that's just how it goes, right? There was no money for things like that. So that's just how it goes. And I think, people need to be very flexible with what they're doing when they're starting out, and understand that like, yeah, okay, you might be selling something, but if you're going to want to just sit in this little box and say like, okay, I'm going to press this button all day and that's my job and I'm going to get paid to press this button, or a lot of buttons, also known as a keyboard, you're not going to get where you need to go. Like, you need to look at a project, at a job, and say like, hey, what is it that needs to happen here in order to make this happen? And I remember it was right at the time when BlackBerry started. So it actually gave me such an opportunity to be able to be out of the office and still get emails, which was such a game changer at the time. Like that made a huge difference, because I remember I used to just sit in the office and wait for the phone to ring, or, I just, whatever it was, 9 to 5, I was sitting in that office and it was me alone, and just doing whatever needed to be done, planning an event, planning a fundraiser. And, I didn't know what I was doing. My father was involved in charity before, and he kind of said, like, okay, so this is how you put on a parlor meeting. And he gave me kind of a step-by-step process. Okay, you got to find somebody who is well-known in the community, who has a lot of contacts and connections, and pitch them and have them invite their friends, figure out what you're going to do for the evening, and then you can ask. And so I was hired in July of 2006, and by the following November, I put on a small fundraiser in somebody's home. But I actually didn't, and we talked about this, we didn't really I never felt good about fundraising before being able to offer the community a real service that they would value and appreciate.
Which I get.
Right? So that was really important.
Makes sense. I mean, you don't want to be like, gimme, just hold on for the giving part of it. Or like receiving all the money. But I mean, at the same time, you have to look at it as, if you don't have anything to give, you can't give anything. So if you don't have that money to help support the programs, and if you bring volunteers on and other things, you can't really support the programs that you wanted to build out necessarily, or bring on the more staff. So in that sense, it kind of does make sense to have Choni or a fundraiser there to help bring in the income so you can hire all those staff.
Yeah, absolutely. But like, keeping in mind, like, that was 2008. We started in 2006. So we didn't take our fundraising as seriously as we might have in 2008 than we did in 2006. It was a lot about volunteers. Like, I remember just volunteers, and I mean, as a volunteer coordinator, you know this better than anyone. Like, one volunteer can impact a family in countless ways, whether it's just visiting that one sibling or that one sick child in the home once a week. Right. Like, they're just so impactful. So there was a lot of things that were happening that don't necessarily cost a lot of money, particularly in the early days where we were kind of just bootstrapping it. Like, hey, we're just going to get volunteers. And so to give you context, my first time I did a fundraiser was probably November, December, 2006, maybe even January 2007. But the first volunteer event that we put on was October 2006, where we put on an event, and I still remember it because I used the contact that I had from high school to use their very large home. George and Linda Hofstetter had a home in the had some space in their basement, and we at the time I was working with another young woman, Dina Rothschild, who helped. She had been a counselor at Camp Simcha, and she helped bring a number of volunteers to come to that event. And once we had like that core group of people who were really willing to help, made it all the difference. And I think that speaks to what the essence of a charity is. It's really a community of people who want to impact in a variety of different ways. It could be through money, it could be through volunteering, it could be, and if you have the right group of people who are together and they believe in a cause and they want to make a difference in this particular cause, whether it's environmental or, helping sick children like how Lifeline does, or any number of causes, it's really about creating that community around the cause. And the rest will come, I find.
Okay, so you said in 2006, when you first started, what were the priorities of getting up and running with? Like, what kind of programming with the volunteers did you want to get going right away?
So what I tried to do was, look at what I had. And what I had was, we had a brand, because in the U.S., High Lifeline existed in the U.S. And High Lifeline had a brand. We had certain programs that were international programs that were already running that I could tap local people into, like Camp Simcha Special. At the time, now it's so easy. We go on Zoom, but at the time it was, they had these phone lines that parents with similar type of diagnoses would call in to have a support group. Things like that. I really used whatever infrastructure I had that wouldn't cost us a lot of money, but provided value and support to the community in a meaningful way that we kind of utilize. And that was really my focus, was providing as much value for as little as possible, spending as little as possible to ensure that we can support as many families as we can, and to the community, so the community would see that value. And then, I mean, the date is on the wall. I have to check, but then, we threw our first gala fundraiser concert, which is when I met, I actually knew him from before, Israel Schachter, who's currently on our board of directors. But at the time, he had been putting on these concerts in Israel for another charity, United Hatzalah. So he had this experience of putting on these concerts, and I met him. It was that same October of 2006. And we said, hey, maybe we should put on like a fundraising event. And we talked about it, but I don't think anything really happened. And we talked, and then I want to say it happened in February 2007, was it? And I will say this, I'll be completely honest, I was reluctant. I was not, like, Israel, or Yami, he goes by, was he was certainly more entrepreneurial than I was. I was not used to that level of, like, let's put it on the line. We have some money in the bank, but like, we're going to use this money and turn it into more money. And if we lose this money, then we lost it all. And so we made like commitments. We made commitments to like Roy Thompson Hall and to all of these Jewish singers. And to the point where head office had some money in Canada that they wanted their hands on right before we made any more commitments, because they were worried that we weren't going to make it and that they would lose those dollars. So they called those dollars, they send me the money ASAP. And I remember that feeling of feeling very not believed in. And there's no problem with that, because I didn't have a track record. So people were like, well, this guy's making all these commitments. Does he actually know what he's doing? But, Yummy, and at the time, Shanti Goldstein, a few other people really pushed me to move forward with this. And, their line was, you got to spend money to make money. You got to spend money. And I was always just like, we're a charity. We got to save. We can't spend. And like, they made all these commitments, and, we worked together and through a lot of the contacts of the community and with the brand of Lifeline. That first year at our concert, I think we raised like $350,000, wow. Which, now looking back is not a ton of money. It's money to get things going, but
it's a few new staff. That's good.
That certainly made a huge difference, but it really put us on the map in a different way. People at the time were not used to that level of entertainment, and we were suddenly associated with this very sophisticated, it was a 60-piece orchestra or a 45-piece orchestra. I know it doesn't sound exciting, but it was Chazanut, which we chose because it really kind of ran the gamut of like Orthodox and non-Orthodox. People would really appreciate that, particularly the old generation non-Orthodox. Think Holocaust survivor, your bubbies and zadies, who, whether they were religious or not, really appreciated that kind of music, along with, a full choir, and Cantor Helfgott was just amazing. I never knew somebody could sing like that, and I was never into that. So we put that show on, and it was really a game changer. And then Craig, Choni, you came on shortly thereafter once we had those funds, because that was really how we did that. And moved offices.
Yeah.
Because we needed another office space. But we didn't move into any office. Like, the office was it was like an apartment.
It was a basement apartment with like 2 tiny office rooms, and then a little area. And like even our toys, that like when you talked about us collaborating, we'd figure out who's going to pick up the toys for which school, because you started that toy drive initiative, which was amazing. We put them in the bathtub. And now, again, the bathtub wasn't used, and it'd be very clear, but we put the toys in the bathtub in plastic bags, and they were all around us. Like I'd go for it, like, oh, where are we going to put these? So Morty and I piled up in our offices, and if that thing collapsed on us, someone would have to dig us out. Like I kept thinking, if I go because of toys, okay, well, at least we did what we were supposed to. But to Morty's credit and Yami's credit of getting that off the ground made it easier for me, because when I walked in, Morty's like, well, we don't really have donors like per se as other organizations did, but at the same time, he's like, well, here's a list of donors. I was like, well, where are these from? He's like, well, we had this event. I was like, okay, this is great. So my starting point was actually reaching out to them to initially just thank them for their support and start to sort of interview them and say, hey, like, what is it about this organization? Why are you giving to Chai? And from there, I kind of got the community's feedback, irrespective of the services we were, like Chai was providing, because they didn't really know, thankfully, because they didn't have a child or someone connected to them who was ill. And they said, well, this is seemingly something that's needed, and we understand what we're giving to. And then it clicked for me on both facets. Like, okay, here's someone who's thankfully removed from the hospital, or a child that's ill, or a family member that's ill, but they still understand it, like, inherently, what it means. Like, if, God forbid, your child is diagnosed or a family member is diagnosed, you need support. And especially with people who don't have an extensive family in the city. And then they all said, well, this, makes us feel good to give back, and we understand who we're giving to. And with those things combined, it was like, okay, so we've got current donors, we've got people who are giving, they understand what they're giving to for the most part. And there's programming like that you said you tapped into. There was Camp Simcha, toy drive that was happening, local volunteers that you'd built, which was extensive. You had, when I walked in, I think you had 50 to 75 volunteers who were already supporting the organization. And I think from there, it made it a lot easier for me to be able to go out and say, okay, we've already built this. Now with your support, we can take it even further. We can create more programming. Morty had a vision of, no, we're not stopping at Camp Simcha. We're not stopping at volunteers helping. We need to create a full infrastructure around this family for the child and the entire family. And that was what was unique. It was always like, so you've got a child and they're going to the hospital, and the hospital's going to take care of everything. But that was never the case. They're not equipped to provide social service support to the entire family. And that was what was really unique about Chai, and what I was so passionate about was not just the child that was getting support, it was the entire family, the other siblings and the parents. And that was really remarkable. When I went out to donors to explain this, and again, from my healthcare background, I could really speak to it. It made a huge difference for them. And I think, to Morty, to your credit, of seeing how you needed the volunteers first, you needed something on the ground happening to be able to show that, we need to provide that support. And then Morty went on and said, this isn't just about children who hear about us. Every Jewish child in the city who is experiencing any type of illness should get support. And why are we limiting ourselves to, again, I don't remember how many families you had. Do you remember how many in 08?
I mean, we started with 18 families. That I remember, because there was some kids going to Camp Simcha. We haven't interviewed like Lisa Ehrlich, but she was involved in some of our videos recently. Like, her son was the first boy that I actually got in contact and started arranging volunteers and doing things with.
She the first client here?
No. Well, yes, but the first client, he was already a client when I walked in the door, because they were sending their son to Camp Simcha, because they were still able to go to camp, even if there was nothing local on the ground. But the first client here, I think we talked about him, Jacob Toledano.
Yes.
He had a heart condition, and he was the first client that we really, we took care of a lot of things around the family, and made arrangements, to have volunteers with him in the hospital all the time, things like that. Yeah, that was then. But then, as Craig, you're jumping ahead a few years. Even like we started the Penis Helping Hand division,
right.
And that was with Jeremy Rubinoff, and he really came to me with this idea, and I said, hey, I think this can be really impactful. Him and Israel Shachter actually came together with that idea, and then later on moving into Montreal and providing support in Montreal and creating the infrastructure that we have there as well. Like, it didn't just stay here in Toronto. People started hearing about it in other cities and were calling us from these other cities to get support. But I want to highlight a story actually that I think is really important for people to hear, which like in those early days, I met with a gentleman. There was a company. It's still around in some form called Astro Media.
Yes.
Astro was bought by Bell for a couple $2 billion a number of years ago. But at the time, it was started by the Greenberg brothers. I think the guys who started TMN, which is now Crave, huge company. I think they ended up having to, like, they became a monopoly, so that they had to like sell to Bell, because in order to not be a full monopoly, they were really, really wealthy. And a dear friend of mine was able to get me a meeting with one of the Greenberg brothers, and I sat down, and it was a small charity, and I'm going to this literally billionaire's office, and I pitch him. He's just so what do you want? And I think most people in that moment would have said, well, I'd like some dollars, I'd like a donation, could you support us? And one of the things that, and I don't know if I got this from you or where we picked this up, was like, you got to look at the donor and understand who he is as a person and where he might be excited and want to get involved, but also what are his capabilities. And at the time, Astro Media owned radio stations and billboards, and we're this little tiny organization literally working in a basement apartment. But I said to him, I'd like an ad campaign. And that was like, oh, okay, I can do that easy. Like, that's no big deal at all. Like, I'll just give you some, whatever billboards haven't sold, we'll give you those. And, we'll give you some radio time or some air time. No big deal. Like, easy. Give you on the weekends, in the wee hours of the morning. But, for me, that lesson of looking at the person and understanding what he was capable of and asking him, so we're this tiny organization, but we're putting on a multi-million, well, I would say multi-million, but a few $100,000 ad campaign about the work that we did or the work that we're doing, because, we had this contact and this connection. And it was like we seemed a lot bigger than we actually were because of that. And I think in people's minds that helped us grow. And I think that was really helpful to you, Choni, when you started having to push the concert and things of that nature in subsequent years. And we were able to we looked a lot bigger than we actually were. An office of 3 people, and 70 volunteers or so.
Yeah, I don't think people really, if they saw under the hood, I think they'd see like really hardworking guys, really bootstrapping it, killing ourselves, doing everything we could. But yeah, it was way more. And then having that infrastructure with Camp Simcha and everything else, Chai International helped in terms of saying, hey, we're still sending kids where we can, but also showing your vision in terms of we want to be able to make this bigger. And how do we do that? But yeah, to speak to your point, it was very astute saying to, Mr. Greenberg, this is what we'd like. Can you help us with it? For him, like you said, it was easy to do. And I think across the board, we tried to do that as much as possible, to connect with the donor and find out, like, what is it about them that they're excited about? And it took me to the point where towards, I think, the middle of my tenure, it was like, okay, let's focus on the donors who want to get involved with programming. And I think, to your credit and everyone's credit at Chai, on the programming side, it wasn't like, let's create a program that the donor's about, because I know that happens a lot. This was about, what are we doing? And let's find a donor who's excited about that program. Whether it was the after-school program, which was amazing when that was, initiated, or the volunteer program, or the visits to the hospital, or Camp Simcha, or Camp Lifeline, when that became a vision as well. And donors, I think, really took to, hey, you know what? If I support this and I give $5 or $5,000 or $50,000, it's going to help these children do X. And Camp Lifeline, it was built on that in terms of, hey, if we have X number, we can get 10 kids to camp. And if we have this, we can get 30 kids to camp. And I think the need was always there. And to have donors who are seeing that but understanding it was really great. And as we took that larger perspective of, okay, well, here's an ad campaign that we're doing for whatever concert it was, and we're like, how are you doing this? It was to Morty's credit of thinking, I hate to use the phrase, but outside the box, right?
Completely. It's all strategy. That? You can ask for a one-time donation of whatever, and they'll last you however long, but like doing a ad campaign that large, you're reaching everybody in the city, so everyone's going to know who you are. They're going to be like, what is this high Lifeline? I have to go find out. They're going to go do the research on it, whatever it might be. Instead of just taking a donation, which you can use for things, but it's going to disappear eventually. This is something that's going to resonate with people because they're going to remember, oh, I remember that ad from the radio or from TV or from the billboards. So it's a very strategic point to do something like that, where you have the person in that power. Yeah, why not take advantage?
Yeah, and but I think that's the kind of stuff that you hear like from entrepreneurs who are starting, like, these like, I don't know if you watch any of these. I love reading and finding out like founder stories and understanding, and I really resonate with these guys because as much as High Lifeline was established by Rabbi Scholar, and Choni, you keep mentioning that. I want to throw that out there. Like, you keep mentioning that there was I had foresight, or I had the vision. I took so much of that from him, and we met him already in the first couple of podcasts. But just understanding what it takes to start a business. And it's really helped me many times when we're fundraising, because I can understand what it is that founder went through to get his business off the ground. It's, wearing all those hats, not having a specific job description, never ending your job. Like, you might be in Peru, and I literally have been in Peru, or you might be you might be, I don't even want to say, like, busy with your children or whatever, but the job never ended. It was with that BlackBerry, it made all the difference in the world, because, you could literally keep things going 24/7. And when you're a young man and really motivated, I used to say all the time also, like, I can never work as hard as I work for an accounting firm when it's a mission that you have. And this is one of the things that I think is important for anybody running a business. Even when you were starting out and introducing Choni, or like, Choni's mission is, and it's about passion, about helping people create wealth through real estate. It has to be mission driven. It has to be so mission focused. You can't just be selling cars. You have to be helping people get to where they need to go, because that helps them. That makes a difference. And I find if you motivate people with a mission that they're changing people's lives for the better, you get that much more productivity, because you'll attract the people who want to be there for the right reasons, right? So here at Chai, I find, people who are successful are the people who are extremely mission driven and are willing to do whatever they need to do to fulfill that mission. The people who are less so will be more guarded around some of those things. And, I know there's all kinds of stuff about work-life balance and healthy and all that. And, I encourage people to be healthy about those things. I really do. At Chai here, we want people to take something on our time. Anybody who gets hired, oftentimes we offer them, do something on your own, and you can do it on our time, things of that nature. During the pandemic, we kind of had to change that a bit, but pre-pandemic, for sure, that was the case. And, it's an important thing, that being that mission driven and that mission focused. And it's somebody who kind of started High Lifeline, and now, Choni, you're starting your own business. Like, you understand that better than anyone, I think. Like, you're all about that mission.
That parallel was exactly what I'm experiencing now. I mean, I'm 2 years into Freed Capital, but I think the knowledge and the skill set and the drive, all of that came from Chai, understanding that I tried to make as best as possible. This is family time, this is dinner time. But during our concert season, I would say between January and March or April, depending on what it was, there were most nights I was emailing, calling. Like, that's when donors, I couldn't go. I mean, once in a while I could go for lunch or during the day, but there was a lot of late nights or evenings when I was responding to donors. And I think because of the mission of what we were doing, how much I believed in, and how much I could see firsthand how we were helping and who we were helping, it made me not have that negative feeling about what I was doing. But even more so, it's like, okay, let me book out the time that I need for my family. But outside of that, let's get the work done. Let's raise the money and ultimately help the kids and families that needed that help. But I always looked at it like I had that startup mentality when we, first got rolling. And I think you helped to foster that, which was amazing. And I've taken that, along the journey through Chai and then into kind of my new world now, 100%. That it's understanding that there is a quote unquote work-life balance, but at the same time, I think it's all a mindset in terms of even now during the day, in the summer, as an example, when my kids were off, if we were able to take a couple hours and go mini golfing, rock climbing, do all that stuff that we love to do, I would do that, but understand that, okay, later on, during the day, at night, so on and so forth, or on the weekend during some time, I would need to be getting back to the work if it needed to get done. And that 100% helped. And I don't know whether that was innate or it just developed as we were working at Chai, recognizing that if a donor needed us or a family needed us, in your perspective, on a Sunday or evening, it's what we needed to do to be able to help to build. And because of the passion I think we had for the work, and we could see it firsthand. I think one of the things you've always professed, which was amazing, is there's a family event. Not only should you should come, but your family should come too, to understand what you're working towards. And it made a huge difference for my wife and my kids to be able to see firsthand, like, oh, while dad's doing work, this is what the work is. And that 100% made it. And it was so smart in your regard, not only giving us as employees of the organization, the fact of our families having to have a day out, wherever it was, but for them to see firsthand was really, I think, amazing on both sense, from the, understanding what we're doing, but also conveying that to our families to say, here's how your family member is making a difference day in and day out. And when they're not always there on a Sunday or busy at night or whatever the case may be, here's what they're actually making a difference for. And I think it's easier to do that if you're a doctor or a nurse and somewhere in the hospital. Hey, this is where I go every day. Whereas at Chai, you're an organization, especially when you have young kids. What do you mean you're going to work in an office and they need you at night? But who needs you at night? So it really made it all come together.
Yeah, and that's still a policy to this day. Employees bring their families to our events.
I do it all the time.
I will say I have struggled with it sometimes because people are busy with their families at an event and they need to be busy with our families. But it is hugely valuable and hugely important. And one of the tricks that Rabbi Scholar actually told me to do was every Friday night, and obviously in the Jewish tradition, Friday night we sit down to many people will sit down to a family meal, and it'll be just a really nice time of the week where we all get together. Whether from the hustle and bustle of the week, you sit back, it's the Sabbath, and he said he would sit down and he would tell his children, this is what we accomplished this week, not I. I might have been out of work doing it, but it's what we all did this together, and would share some of the things that he accomplished that week, but it put it in the context of all of us, because it really was the whole family. The whole family had to give up their time with their father because they were busy. He was busy doing X, Y, and Z. So in many respects, it was we. It was mommy. It was all the children. And throughout the years, I employed that tactic. Not necessarily even on a Friday night, but just sharing, what was accomplished. And, obviously kids really, they like the exciting stuff. So, over the years, meeting the celebrities and the prime minister and things like that, that was like super exciting for them. But, for the most part, I can't tell you, I didn't even know who Drake was. I didn't know who he was.
Not know who Drake is.
Yeah, I used to call him Drake Hub. He was a donor to Lifeline. He, they threw an event and raised money for us, and meeting Will Smith and Prime Minister Trudeau and Prime Minister Harper, just all these incredible people. It's been a real honor to have met them, but being able to share that with the family has been super key. And I think that that's important for anyone running a business or anyone going to work. Like, share what you've been up to, share your accomplishments, but understand that it's not just you, it's them too. They're all putting in all that work and that time and that effort. So
100%. I used to do that myself. I was a dog trainer, dog walker before I joined Chai Lifeline. I had my own business. I'd be out all day, pick up the kids, and then I'd go out at night. Again, I'd be doing training, so I'd be gone for most of the time. And then when I came here, one of the reasons I started here was my wife was the nurse at Chai Lifeline Way, which is the sleepover camp. So I came out there with my daughters, and I connected with a bunch of the staff, and almost a year later, here I am. So it definitely does speak volumes to that mission and to the understanding and to the drive and to the support of everybody around you, where you guys can get. And it's super important to have that. So, with two of you starting off, the fact that you had that past relationship from 3 years old or grade 3, whatever you said it was, to through high school and everything till now, and you guys were able to connect on such a level and make things happen.
Well, I want to share something, and I think I've shared this with you in the past, Choni. You might not even remember it, but, starting out, I have a natural distrust of people. I don't know why. I just do. and really, I was concerned to let somebody in because somebody in development becomes a very powerful person in the organization. They have the relationships around the money.
Right.
And at the time, I spoke to a good friend of mine, and I think I must have shared this with you.
Years later. Yeah.
And he said, I was concerned, but I said to him, and this speaks to your name and who you are as a person, not even while you're working, but like who you are as an individual matters, because it will play out in numerous ways throughout your life. And I said to him, this guy who I'm friend, I knew him when we were younger. He wants to come and, he's interested in working at Lifeline, and, bringing a number 2 person in. That's a big person. It's going to be, the second person that the organization hires is going to have an impact for years to come. And you did, and you have. And when you have a community organization like Lifeline, bringing a number 2 who's going to impact that organization is actually going to impact the entire community. So, I'll say this now too. The community of Toronto owes Choni Fried a debt of gratitude for everything that he's done for this community. Like, it would not be here without you, and it's integral and important for people to know that. And we left during the pandemic, and I wasn't able to say that in a public forum, but it's important that I do. And I hope we can do that at some point in the near future.
I think you just did.
Well, not necessarily at an event the way I envisioned it, though. But regardless of that, he said to me, there's no one more trustworthy than Craig Fried, and you will not have to worry if you hire him. And to me, that was so important to hear from somebody that I trusted, that he was a trustworthy guy, that I knew that I didn't have to worry about somebody nipping at my heels, or and being able to just focus on the work that needed to be done and trust that it was going to be done properly and in the right way. And you lived up to that in every sense of the word throughout our tenure working together. And that was an important thing. But I want to ask a question now. So it's 2008 you start.
Yep.
And, you walk in and you had been working at Bar Ilan, which had infrastructure. I know you didn't particularly love your boss there. I remember that. But what was striking to you about Lifeline when you came in? Like, what was that like to come in with no infrastructure or very little infrastructure? I'm curious.
Yeah, first and foremost, thank you for saying that. It's I appreciate it, and it doesn't go without notice that you need somebody like that in your corner working with you side by side to be able to get done. And the trust was implicit for me as well. I didn't ever worry that, there was something happening around the corner on the sides. I knew that your mission was like mine, was what are we going to do to help these kids and make a difference for all their families. And I think even when I think about some missteps that happened when I was at Chai with donors or whatever else, it was all, how do I make sure this works for the kids and families, and probably put blinders on in terms of, forgetting that people are people. And, no matter, you've got this mission in your head about helping Chai Lifeline to building and growing, well, you still got to be considerate and understand people's feelings and all of that goes on. And I think about that even to this day. But, I was at Bar Ilan, and the mission, I understood inherently what the mission was for the university there, but I couldn't feel it and touch it. And because I came from the background that I did in the healthcare space and everything else, I was like, well, how do I find something? And I think part of it goes back to that trust. And I think because we had a kinship from before, it's like, okay, well, we can do this. We've just got to figure out how. And I don't think I ever sat in my office and when I got there even and said, okay, well, this isn't going to work. And I don't know whether that was being young and naive. And there was probably part of that on both of our accounts. It's but
I had a lot of chutzpah.
Well, when you're younger, you don't really think of these things. You just kind of look forward and keep going.
But and I'm sure some of it came from you, Mord, whoever. But when I went to a donor to see them, I wasn't shy about asking. And I think it comes from, the kids and the families that we helped and who I got to meet and understand, like, what they're going through is so immense, and hopefully no one ever experiences it. And what's the worst that's going to happen? They're going to say no to me. And they did frequently. I think I got used to that.
I always thought it was never like a no. It was always later. Maybe later.
Yeah.
They never said no outright. Like, we don't care about children
that's
with
it.
serious illnesses.
Yeah.
It was more like, it's not a good time now.
But I think that helped to foster my relentlessness.
Right.
And my follow-up, which to even this day has been such a benefit, because unfortunately people, with all respect, aren't doing what they're supposed to in a number of industries and not living up to what they should be doing for kids, families, you name it. So that follow-up has stayed with me to this day. But yeah, it was never an official no. It was always, well, not right now. But I think that helped, because people who couldn't give financially also, it was like, okay, but if you can't do this, can you do that? And they would say, what do you mean? And I think I got connections even to when I took the kids to meet the Maple Leafs backstage. They got to watch a private practice, then come and see the Leafs get stuff signed. I think that came about in a bunch of things like the Raptors and all that sort of things that we started to create. It's like, okay, if you can't give money, well, can you connect me with someone who can do this? And they're like, oh, well, maybe I can. And it was really hard for them then to say no, because they weren't giving financially, but they made that, all they needed was that warm introduction to someone, and then I would push hard. Right. And we would both get at it. And you would, I think, work on the kind of movie side of things, and I was trying the local sports side of things, and we try to combine what we could do. And if we were to really think back to some of the stuff we were able to pull off, there were organizations that had been around for decades who weren't bringing kids to meet the Maple Leafs or the Raptors or Drake and it was just, I think it was chutzpah, and just a matter of like, this isn't about me, it isn't about you. This is about these kids and these families who deserve the world, and what they're going through is so tough. How do we make one day brighter? And it really fueled, and like, only thinking about it now, really, it's just, I don't think I was shy about it. I was always respectful. I think across the board, I was always very respectful about a no, and I understand. And Honey Sherman, Zichrono Livracha, was like pivotal in helping me understand that as well. Because when I would sit with her, it wasn't about the money, it was the advice and the guidance. And she said, even myself and Barry and the family at our level, there's only so much we can do at a given time. And it helped kind of bring me down to someone like that, whose name is everywhere and continues to live on, and her legacy is beyond. That really helped to frame that in terms of, okay, so they said no, big deal. Let's figure out what else we can do. Because if they can't give now, maybe they can give later, or give in a different way. But across it all, we were punching above our weight and doing more than I think anyone would have imagined if they really understood what we were able to accomplish.
How nervous were you guys then when you're out looking for donations and approaching donors for different things? Like, did you imagine you'd be getting in amounts of money that you're bringing in at that time?
Yeah, it's a question I actually want to ask him. Before we go there, I do want to say, like, Yami Shafter on our board, he taught me, he says, it's not about the money you give. It's about the connections you can give. You don't need to be a rich man to impact a charity in a very meaningful way.
Right.
And to this day, one of the most impactful people to Lifeline Canada is certainly Yami Shafter. Just last month, we took a whole group of people to the Elton John concert. They got backstage, and that wasn't because, yes, he did donate some money towards it, but it was his connections that made that happen. And over the years, it's been a lot of that with him. But I actually want to ask you, Choni, because I have a great story about, my first time of asking somebody for a $25,000 gift. But I'm curious, I remember it. When you came back to the office, you're like, yes. And I don't know if we could say it even, but the donor he likes to be private.
Yeah.
But the donor was like, I got it was a 5-figure gift.
Yeah.
And it was like one of his first times meeting him. So how did that conversation go? What was that discussion like? I remember you saying to me, and I'm not going to put words in your mouth. I just did what he told me to do. He said, follow up with me then. And I followed up with him then. I didn't push. I wasn't disrespectful. I just did. He gave me a lead and I just listened to what he said. I actually stopped and listened. And this is what he said. Call me in 3 months. Okay, so I called him in 3 months. Email me in 2 weeks. Okay, and then I followed up with an email in 2 weeks. But I'm curious how that question went. What was that like for you?
Yeah, so you're 100% right. It was a matter of finding him on his schedule because of how busy he is. But I mean, people who know him, and I don't think we can mention him, but he's an incredible mensch and gives tzedakah, and it's part of his mandated mission, and always has been. And we were new. I don't think he knew anything about us. So I went in there just talking to him and educating him about this. And he had kids of his own. And I talked to him from, heart to heart, kind of like, this is what these kids are going through. We're trying to build, and we need his support. And to his credit, and not mine, he understood and said, okay, I can allocate a certain amount, but and I said to him, well, if you can do this, this is what we can do. And I helped him kind of, I think, see a little bit of the vision of where we could go. And maybe he pushed a little bit more than he would have otherwise. But I was definitely nervous, I think. But it just came, I think, from just having a conversation. He was very always direct. And there wasn't a lot of fluff with him. Like, you didn't need to butter him up or anything like that. And that was a little intimidating, especially at my age, and meeting this person who I could understand his impact in the community, both from a business perspective and a philanthropic perspective. And towards the end of the meeting, I just said, we'd like your help, and this is what we'd like it for. And he said, okay, I'm not really so concerned actually where the funds are going. And I said, really? He's like, yeah, I mean, I've heard about you guys a little bit, and I like you, I trust you, and I expect that you follow up with me and tell me how things are going. And I said, I'll be here every week if you need me to. I think I said that to him. He's like, no, I don't need you here in my office every week. I was like, oh, okay. He's like, come every, year, or give me a call every 6 months. I said, okay, definitely. And I'll email you some more. He's like, again. But I did. And I think
that's
he
so
actually
important also,
it.
because you listened to what he said.
Yeah.
And I think that's I know we keep pushing this in the business world, but like, listening is such an important skill, because when you really listen and you really understand and take that information, it is a game changer in many respects.
Yeah, and people don't do enough listening. There's always too much talking, and I think I'm at fault for that as well. But when you really...
Hey, we're on a podcast. We're just yammering away today.
Exactly.
I'm going to ask him one more question, and it's the question that I've been wanting to ask him for a while. And not because anybody here is thinking that way, but I'm just curious. Like, you left, and when you left Lifeline, you left, and things were going fine. I mean, like, obviously the pandemic had just hit, and that was scary for any organization. And, from a numbers perspective, Lifeline contracted $1.5 million between 2019 and 2020. So, thank God we came back in 2021 back to our pre-COVID numbers, but it was a tough time. And you were so good about it, but like, I'm curious, how did you know when the right time for you in your career was to leave? I know you'd always wanted to go into finance, so that wasn't even a discussion, but how did you know that? And then when you did, like, how did you feel about it, and how do you feel about it today?
Great. So, we had talked openly about me kind of figuring out next steps for me and when that would be, and it was all kind of out there. There was no something set in stone, and we figured that out. And I've always had this passion for personal finance, always had this passion for how I help people, educate people, help them kind of, whether it's build wealth through real estate or attain financial freedom, just, move their life along in the best manner possible. And I understand it inherently. And I think it was January, February of 2020 when I said, maybe this is the year that I go out, take that risk, and kind of follow this other passion of mine that I've had for so long. And I think you get to a stage, and I hate to say when you know, sort of like when you find your partner, but you just do. And there's a point, and then I think when COVID happened, it really accelerated everything in terms of, like, there's no more waiting. I can't wait anymore. And it wasn't and looking at it and looking back on it, wasn't a negative to Chai Lifeline or something here wasn't working, so on and so forth. It was just me looking at, okay, I think I've done everything I can for the organization. I've been almost 12 years, day in, day out, living it, breathing it. And it was time to follow another passion and help people in a different way. And pandemic hit on top of that. And I think it was late March or early April. when we had that conversation, I said, Mort, I think it's time. And it's really, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'd like to do. And how do we make sure there's a, best transition as possible? And I think I'll tell anybody who, who's listening, it's just, there's a time when you'll know whether it's a job, because I changed careers completely, right?
We used to joke. I mean, you worked at PJ's Pen Store and Old Navy. You had you were a jack of all trades.
Yeah. I mean, I worked at a bank years ago, right? For a year and a half when we first got married. So that was part of it. And I had a finance background and personal finance background, my family's business. So yeah, I had a passion for it for a long time. And I've done a lot of things and spent a lot of time in fundraising, was trying to figure out, okay, what's the next steps? And for me, it made sense in terms of what I would do next. It was a matter of when it would work, when it would be fair, how it would play out. I wanted to do my best to leave Chai Lifeline in the best place possible when doing it. And I think just COVID accelerated my decision just because of how dire, drastic it was, and no time like the present. I always thought of carpe diem as something as, seize the day. You've got to go and do things when you need to. And that was really accelerated. People literally getting sick, some of them dying because of this. And I'm okay, you know what? Not to, be morbid, but you take stock and figure out, okay, what do I need to do next, and when should I be doing this, and what's best for my family at the time? And that's really what accelerated that decision. And I was okay, well, how do I just make sure I'm a mensch about it and do it the best way I can for Chai?
And I am always grateful for you for that. You did give us a lot of time, and finding people during the pandemic was not an easy thing. I didn't meet the person who stepped into your shoes in person. I had to meet her outside at a cafe for half an hour. It was when there was no restrictions for a couple of weeks, and then it was certainly challenging. And as great as she might be, I don't think anybody could step into the shoes that you and I had, just really in the trenches. I always say it was you'll never forget that. That's something that will remain my whole life as a time of look what we accomplished, and we did it together, and it was just such an incredible time. And then there's so much more to share, because there's literally we didn't talk about Montreal, we didn't talk about Panina's Helping Hand, we didn't talk about bringing on new employees, and all the other people that came out through over the years, who've been here now for 10 years plus. So many people have really come and built this place and created, made sure that Chai Lifeline could continue the mission. So there's so much more to talk about. But
you're coming back.
Yeah. Round 2.
But I certainly appreciate your time now. And like I said, I always remember the times that we had building this place with such fondness. And when we bought this building, I'll never forget. I don't think anyone in the organization really understood what that meant for an organization to be able to purchase a building, aside from you and I.
Yeah.
And we had it was such an accomplished feeling that here we are creating bricks and mortar from something that wasn't there. And we saw that happen. It came from nothing, and now it's something. And there's a programming, and there's people, and there's hustle, and there's bustle. You commented today, what is going on in this office?
Yeah.
He hasn't been here in a couple of years, but it's it was hustle and bustle then too. Maybe not as much, but I'll always remember that and always feel a sense of closeness to you for that. And I appreciate your time today. So thank you.
It's been a real pleasure and wonderful to reminisce, and just to see where you've continued to build and continue to grow. And I wish Chai and you and everybody just success and continue to make a difference like you do in the community. It's really been wonderful to be just a small part of the journey and help to, in whatever small way I could, to get us where you are today, and just watch over the last couple of years how it's continuing to grow and build. So it's been wonderful.
Thank you, honey.
Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. It's great meeting you. But it sounds that you're a little bit more than a small part of everything going on here.
I appreciate that. And it was great to be here. And we'll do round 2 sometime.
Sure. Sounds good.
And happy birthday, Morty.
Thank you.
Yes, happy birthday.
Thank you. 41. Not a milestone, but something nonetheless.
It's a birthday. Every birthday's a milestone.
Sure.
Thank you, Choni, for being such an amazing guest host and sharing your experience and story with us today.
With such an extensive background in healthcare and charity, and landing such an amazing job with a childhood friend isn't something that happens every day. Thank you, Morty, for agreeing to be interviewed and sharing your wisdom and insight into the world of starting up a charity. Together, you both built such an incredible product with a lot of power behind it. There's so much to take from this conversation, and we didn't even scratch the surface yet. This conversation will definitely be continued. On Air with Chai is a Chai Lifeline Canada project, produced by myself, Bryan Strasberg, hosted by myself and the Executive Director of Chai Lifeline Canada, Mordechai Rothman. Guests are booked by Orly and graphic design is done by Candace Alper. On Air with Chai is edited by myself, and the music is provided by Music Unlimited at pixabay.com. To learn more about Chai Lifeline and how you can help us, please visit our website at chilifelinecanada.org. Don't forget to subscribe and give us that 5-star rating, and of course, share it with all your friends. Thank you for choosing to listen to On Air with Chai and supporting our cause. Being a nonprofit organization, we rely on the support from our community to help keep our programs running and allow us to continually service our families while offering incredible experiences, such as family vacations after treatments, trips to Edmonton Mall, home-cooked meals, big sibling programs, day camp and sleepover camp, and many, many more. If you enjoy our stories and you're thinking of making a charitable donation, think of Chai Lifeline Canada and the children you would be supporting. You can visit us at chilifelinecanada.org.